I think Gino agrees with me on this. I think we've had this conversation. You hear about organizations or schools or so on and so forth. They say that they teach entrepreneurship. I think it's an oxymoron. I don't think you can teach entrepreneurship. I think you can teach skills. Hey, you got to learn some about accounting. You want to learn some management skills so you can manage better, some techniques, things like that Gino teach. Here's some tools that you can use, that we have found to be very effective. But teaching entrepreneurship, I believe that you are born cursed with it or you're not cursed with it. If you need to be taught to be an entrepreneur, then I think your chances of success are limited because it's hard enough as it is, and it may be depressing to some people, but I think it's somewhat of a curse. Because I think that's why LEAP was to discover whether you are. Discover it, because you can't teach it. So I'll tell you an interesting story. I was blessed, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, to have an opportunity to have lunch with Warren Buffett. So I was invited by a friend of mine who's friends with Warren Buffett, who was in town here in Detroit, and invited like a dozen of his friends to come have what he calls lunch with Uncle Warren, because he kind of friendly calls him Uncle Warren. So we sat there for 3.5 hours, just sitting there having lunch in a conference room here in Detroit, and just asking him questions. And I'll never forget, I asked him a couple of questions. One of the questions I asked him that I'll never forget was so interesting. So, Berkshire Hathaway, which is his company, which is this international bazillion-dollar investment company, he only has there's only 25 employees in the entire company. Only 25, okay, in Omaha. But he says he had 100 direct reports. And the 100 direct reports was the CEOs of all the companies that he owns. And Warren Buffett was talking about how those are the people he deals with. And there was some of them I talked to like every week. Some of them I talked to once a year, just depending on who they are, what's going on. He was a huge believer that it's all about leadership. That when he bought a company, there's two things. Number one, he had to understand the business, and it was all about the leadership. And typically, whatever the one person is, the man or the woman that sits at the top, that is the person who really is the most important person when it comes to investing in the potential success of a business. He was just a huge believer in that. So he was talking about that. So I asked him, I said, I don't call him Uncle Warren, I called him Mr. Buffett. I go, Mr. Buffett, okay, so these 100 people, what would you say is the common thread? What would you say is just, if there was something that you would say is the thing that ties them all together, why you believe that they've been successful, so on and so forth. So he goes, let's first talk about what it's not. He goes, it has nothing to do with school they went to. It has nothing to do with where they grew up or what college they went to, their level of education. None of that has anything to do with it. There's no commonality there. He goes, the one thing is, he says, how early in their life did they start making money? That's what he said. He says, did they have a paper route when they were 10 years old? How early in their life was it just natural for them to be able to just figure out, buy it for $1 and sell it for $1.10? That was his answer.